Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special design capta. I say special because it forms part of the programming of the first ever SLDF. That's the first ever virtual Sri Lanka Design Festival, which is a great achievement, you know, an amazing event. And yes, we're living in challenging times. And yes, we've had some dark days. And I don't think anyone can deny the impact COVID-19 has had throughout the globe, you know, on an existential level, every level from the micro to the macro. But it's very easy in these sort of scenarios to see limitation and focus on the negative. However, you know, a lot of people can focus on the potential and possibility and positivity. So I'd have to say, you know, massive respect and kudos and thanks to the Academy of Design, all their sort of supporting organizations, sponsors, and every single person who's come together to, you know, make a positive impact and participate in the SLDF 2021. So I mentioned the word impact there. For those of you who don't know, the theme for SLDF 2021 is this idea of impact. And one can interpret that in many different ways. For me, if I sort of boil it all down, I see it very simply as, you know, transformation through action. You know, cause and effect, causation, correlation, sort of stimulus response. It's a very sort of kinetic, dynamic process. And that's what we're going to get into today, specifically within the artistic paradigm. So the question we're going to be discussing as a panel, with this amazing panel we have, is how can public art impact and inspire Sri Lankan society? So on that note, I think it's time to get to quickly introduce our lovely panel. As I said, some amazing people in here. I feel very privileged to be moderating this discussion, but I thought rather than me read out generic bios, it would be nice to quickly just go around and for everyone to introduce themselves. So Anoma, would you like to start, please?
Hi, I'm a painter and I've worked for quite a long time on issues of climate change, on diversity and inclusivity, and transformation in my work, personal transformation. Like, I think that's it for the moment.
Personal transformation. Can't wait to unpack that a little bit with you as we get further down the road. Over to you, Rishi, please.
Yeah, so I'm an architect and an interior designer, and I've been in practice in Sri Lanka for over 2 decades, before which I was in India, where I studied and qualified. And yeah, our work is very mixed, but we are particularly engaged with art and craft in most of our work. So yes, I think that covers my area of interest here.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, Azara, please.
So my name is Azara, and I am the editor-in-chief of Art Magazine, Sri Lanka's contemporary art and modern magazine. And what we do is essentially provide a platform to promote visual performance, applied and written art. So we started this journey in 2012, and it has been taking interesting forms through the years.
Awesome, thank you very much, Azara. So as we ended with you, I thought maybe we can sort of start with you again. So basically, someone in your position with the platform that you have, you know, an incredible platform, both digital and in print, Archer. It's an amazing thing that you built up over these years. Obviously, you're in a position where you're kind of this conduit or this medium through which many different facets of the artistic world flow through. So I thought maybe it'd be good just to get a very kind of quick summation from your perspective of where do you think, you know, if we're going to talk about how public art can impact and inspire Sri Lankan society, I think we need a base level. So where would you say, what is the status of public art in Sri Lanka at the moment?
I think it would be interesting for Sri Lanka to sort of look into the potential at which public art could highlight its character, given the fact that public art is not something new. It's been in the bygone here. And even when you look at art in its essence, we think of the Sigiriya frescoes. So from the point at which the first city and one of the first civilizations was also characterized with those works, we see how much it sort of adds value to the people in creating and sort of responding with the community and the times around. And when you look into the recent past, you could find like sporadic surgences of these ephemeral sort of performances, like from the Theatre Collective that has done some interesting works at the Borala Junction somewhere in 2018, where they sort of got the attention of passers-by through very interesting performances. To even in 2019, I think towards the end, there was emergence of artists from all over the island taking on different walls and getting very creative, basically expressing themselves. Just copies, but some were inspired by the agenda of artists like Banksy, and sort of, finding their way of expressing the needs and the urgencies of the time. And then you also have certain works in interesting roundabouts, like even Panchikavatta, you have the horse, and even in certain corporate spaces and hospitality where artists have been commissioned to do some works. So although it does take place in smaller areas, in smaller scopes rather, I feel it would be interesting if it is taken as more on a public process, because public art, if you look at its definition, is basically something that gives form, meaning, and function to the community, and it's a message to the community which goes through a public process. So in that sense, we were also very privileged, and Anoma and Ruchi both were also a part of the design competition for the Port City project, where two sculptures sort of took on the elements of artistic nature. So there was a call out for artists from all of the countryside to provide their submissions. So this process, in the beginning of it in a new city, takes on a very interesting role for art also, in terms of stimulating the minds of people within public spaces. So the scope of public art is large, and it's also interesting that Sri Lanka is taking initiative to sort of, see how it can be engaged with the community.
For sure. So I think you kind of sort of hopped into my sort of next part of the question. But I mean, from what you're saying, it seems that, when you think about public art, especially in the West, obviously, you have your Kapoor pieces, your Gormleys, your Angels of the North, these large scale works, where it seems like somewhere like here, from what you're saying, that there's a movement there, but it's very much in its infancy, despite this kind of rich sort of cultural kind of history and background going back to the Sigiriya frescoes. And then you kind of touched on the Port City public art sort of initiative competition. So I just wanted to bring Anoma in here. Obviously, for those of you who don't know, as Zara kind of touched on it, sort of there was Port City launched this competition for these two public art pieces, one on the beach that was a sculpture and one that was more an interactive wall. And there was a panel of judges, of which Anoma and Ruchi, you were both judges. Zara, you weren't actually on the panel though, right? The judge panel, no. Yeah, I don't think you were. And Cecil Bound was obviously the honorary chair of the panel. So it's going back to you, Anoma, from your sort of, agreeing to be one of the judges on this, I guess I had two questions for you. The first one, what sense did you get from Port City about the thinking behind this competition? Why did they want to open it up to the new generation and make a kind of, and do this? What were your thoughts on that? What did you think?
Well, I think very much they wanted to bring the public into the Port City, if you like, and engage also all the young people with what was happening there. And I think this was a wonderful way to actually bring everybody together. But also because I hope they really appreciate and understand how vital art is to the well-being of a nation, of a society, of a city. And I think it's a great start to how they want to position Port City as something that's very caring about the people in it, not just in terms of buildings, but in terms of, nature and sea and whatever it is that we have around us. And to actually get the public to be actually choosing almost, how they want it to be. I mean, okay, we were the judges, but there were many entries. And I think there were 100 and something entries for the sculpture, I think, that we looked at, Ruchi, I think. And
yeah, there were 150, I think, altogether.
For the wall as well. And then, we took everybody through a moderating process where we also mentored them, etc. And I think this is the way to go. And when I think about how Singapore and even Melbourne have really had a very strong position, a public art platform, in that the government or the city decided to actually support the arts and to actually do a major arts program, has made a huge difference in how the city is viewed. And I just wanted to also, I know it's not quite public art, but the way Bilbao invited the Guggenheim into Bilbao to actually create that museum in there. And Bilbao at that time was just a port city, a really ugly port city, which had no tourists, nothing. And in the last, how many years, I think 20, that the Guggenheim has been there, it's a major tourist site because of the art. I mean, the art is inside the museum and outside the museum. But this is the power of public art, if you like, or public decisions about art. And I think that's wonderful. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, no, I can totally I can imagine in terms of the process, it must have been very sort of invigorating to be exposed to, all these sort of entries and submissions from all over the country. It must be very sort of eye-opening. Just very quickly as well, I mean, just because we're talking about impact, just on a personal level, how did seeing all these entries or being in the middle of this kind of very sort of vivacious process, how did that impact you personally?
Me as an artist, you mean?
Yeah, as an artist, or just any of your thought processes, or? I
mean, what was incredible was the range of ideas that came through. I mean, of range of standards and commitment to it, and also it was very interesting to see how they responded to our mentoring and how they sort of thought it was after all a concept, and then it has to now be built. But how everybody realized how huge it was, I think, that the opportunity as well as the whole structure. So in that sense, it was interesting. And in terms of my work, I think I would say it didn't necessarily make me, but I've done some sculpture and also work that's been on the street, as it were. So it was great to see that happening as well. But it was just a lovely experience. Always is engaging with younger creative minds, of course.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. It's kind of my fountain of eternal creative youth. I kind of try and take that life force from these young creatives whenever I can, because I can get a little jaded in this industry when the sort of realities kick in. So I totally get that. Rishi, sorry, I kept you waiting. I'm very excited to come and get to you. So obviously, we're talking about the call out from this Port City competition. Obviously, you're getting these amazing submissions, obviously from Sri Lankans all around the country. And so in terms of in your work, I know there's this dichotomy or this tension between kind of the preservation of traditional sort of artisanal techniques and craft and heritage, as you spoke about, and kind of reinterpreting them within a contemporary context, sort of taking learnings from them and applying them. So I just wanted to know kind of in terms of, and obviously that's a preservation of identity to a degree in terms of how you talk about it. How did you see that dichotomy in the submissions, as it were? Did you see this kind of tension between traditional, or was everything super contemporary, or could you see how there was sort of contemporary interpretations of the traditional? I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I think art is, we know art is representative of what's going on in society with the people. And the range of submissions we had really represented that. in the modern history of Sri Lanka, that civil war period played a big role in where we are today and how we are shaping up. And I sort of have a little bit of an outsider's perspective because, like I said, I came from India and I've lived here for a long time now, but I still, I was not here before. So I think for that period, there was a stagnation of many sorts. And sort of identities just froze through that period. And after the Civil War ended, it's taken people a little while to begin to grapple with the new identity of what Sri Lanka is going to be, of who they are. And so for me, it was particularly interesting because this competition was called from students. And most of these students, the larger part of their formative years are post-Civil War, right? Because they were like in their late teens, maybe early 20s. So to me, it was very interesting because it truly represented the range of identities that are emerging for Sri Lanka, how they see themselves as Sri Lankans, how they see where Sri Lanka could be, which is, so there was that kind of a dichotomy there. And there were some who were still grappling with their identities and tried to lean more on the traditions they have inherited, but there were many who were able to actually use some of those traditions and traditional concepts, I would say, not visual traditions, but traditional concepts, traditional, concerns, and translate them through technology, through a more visual worldview in terms of the way they responded and with the designs that they presented. So to me, that was very interesting. It was very encouraging. And I felt it was, it was the right people who were invited, the right, demography that were invited to do this first public art competition in a new part of our city.
Mm. Yeah, so like I said, I really hope that I can see some of the other submissions at some point, because it sounds very diverse and I find it very intriguing, very intriguing. Yeah. And what's clear is,
I would have liked to seen some of the runners up or whatever also had done so much work, and there's so much space in Port City. I'd love to see those being developed as well, or somebody else taking them on, or corporates taking them on even, and for us to be able to use some of that amazing creativity that came out at that time to actualize it, if you like. Sorry.
And also, I must say, during the mentoring session, when I was with the artists, I was talking to them about the at least symbols of them incorporated in their submissions could surpass their work to that of national integrity. And in those conversations, it's very interesting that they actually put thought also into it. Even when it came to the interactive wall, they brought in concepts of landscape. During the runners-up sessions where we had all three, it was quite refreshing, even the ones from Melbourne, to have thought of a larger scope. So the thinking pattern, along with their technical expertise, given that they also come from a knowledge with science, brings in a very beautiful combination of strengths. And in fact, I also must agree, the works and the expanse of those who had actually submitted were very, of a very interesting perspective, and it was very refreshing.
Mm. I mean, I wish we had more time, because this is, I think we could just talk about the impact of this one competition on the artistic community, the wider Sri Lankan society. Obviously, we have limited time, and I want to kind of at least try and get a slightly sort of broader view. So as fascinating as I find it, I'm going to have to sort of drag us slightly into a different direction. So going back round, Anoma, going to you, I just wanted to read a quote it's actually from your website. And it's talking about your work, and it says how you depict man's existential anxieties, contemporary concerns about the human condition, and internal tussle with his nature and his fellow man. So, you know, I find that a very, what's the word? It's a sentence rife with possibility in terms of where my head goes when I read that. But I sort of bring up that quote to say, you know, obviously it's very clear that your works play with play is maybe the wrong word, but are concerned with focus on the kind of existential, the sense of well-being, these things that happen within the sort of human condition. So how would you say public art impacts consciousness, impacts our well-being, our soul, if you will, any one of those?
Well, I mean, if you go to something like Cloud Gate, you know, it makes it. What's exciting is that it actually changes the whole environment as you look at it, and it changes you. You know, you're looking at yourself within the environment. So I think art can be many things. It can soothe you. It can make you question things. It can engage you in very many different ways. But I think when it's public art, it has sort of many roles. It can draw you in as a group, convey ideas to people so that they have dialogue and engagement, and very often, perhaps if it's powerful enough, then it can be even transformative. I mean, I don't know if I would say that the Angel of the North is like that in some way. I mean, I'm talking about the sculptures that are sort of well known, but I was just thinking about the fact that just recently, we've had the Tate Gallery, which had to be closed for most of this last year, actually had this amazing installation on the facade of it, which was to do with Diwali. And actually, it's a friend of mine who, in fact, did it. She actually exhibited at the same time with me, Sheila Berman. And it just engaged, it's really engaged Londoners and made them very excited because it's just full of lights, and it's very Indian. It's very inclusive in that sense that it's to do with Diwali and Festival of Lights. And she's an Indian, I don't know if she's part Indian, she's an Indian-British artist. So I think, you know, it does make people, you know, think about how they can relate to each other. And it you know, there's so many different ways, whether it's Banksy making very strong statements, or whether it's sort of quiet internal change. But I mean, I just know, for instance, with this piece of the Tate, which is still on, I think, it's sort of delighting people because they can't go in to see museums. Then they've got this whole exciting thing going on outside, which is to do with, you know, another culture. And so it's engaging in different ways, I think. So I don't know if I've answered that question, but yeah.
No, definitely. There was the answer was there for sure. Leading on to my next question, just very quickly, so again, playing devil's advocate here, if I'm the average person, say, on the street here in Colombo, maybe I haven't had so much exposure to art galleries or art in general, I didn't really think about it. What would you say? So how would you explain the value in having existential variances and existential experience? So this idea of seeing something that creates an emotional change within oneself, or a different relationship with one's environment. Where's the value in that for you? If you were going to convince someone who was like, oh, I'm not artistic, I'm not really, you know, interested in it, I guess where's the value in the experiential quality of public art for you?
Well, I mean, if I were to come back to the idea that, you know, what is the purpose of art? Because in a sense, it serves no purpose whatsoever, in the sense that architecture or applied art has a solution. Art is just there, like music and poetry, to soothe the soul. It's to nourish you. And maybe sometimes people don't actually even understand that it is nourishing, that it is, you know, and that's why I suppose religious art was, you know, till the 15th century was so powerful throughout the world, because it had a form of healing. It does have a healing, nurturing, succoring possibilities. And I think maybe it's possible that we, particularly maybe here even, don't actually appreciate enough the value of art, whether it's public or private. I don't know what Ruchi and Azara, what you think about that, but I mean, I think it is vital to man's soul. I mean, that's why man's been creating it, you know, because
I agree with you. I agree with you, Anoma, and I think in a certain sense, because as a country and a society, I'd say an economy that is very challenged. We even as architects, you know, we always have this battle in our projects to incorporate something that doesn't have like a real quantifiable benefit in terms of, you know, use or whatever. So I think even looking at it from that perspective, a time has come when we as a nation need to establish or express our identity. I think it's very important, you know, if you look at the modern history of Sri Lanka, the post-Civil War history of Sri Lanka, and I think engaging in this kind of process or, you know, commissioning public art and engaging the public through it is going to have two very tangible benefits eventually. One is that it helps, like that's one thing that really struck a chord with me with this competition, was how it was really expressing the hope of our youth. And on another you know, hand, I believe that art unifies. It's visual, it communicates with everyone, you know, so it has a unifying element, and we really need that. We really need that right now in our country.
And that's what's amazing. It has no use whatsoever, except that we need it for our souls. We need it, as we need music, as we need poetry. And yet, when people are thinking in terms of structures and buildings and spaces and properties, they're thinking, oh, well, we can't earn anything from an area of grassland or a little forest or little bits of trees, or you know, the amount of space a public sculpture will take. You know, that could be an apartment or whatever, you know, and making money. And so it's very materialistic. Whereas I think now, perhaps because of COVID also, after 2020, we are so much more aware of the fact that we really need healing, and we need nurturing, and that we need well-being, and you know, wellness society is becoming so much stronger. And even in a city, we need these.
And I also think the role of public art is also that of stimulating reflection, because when you have works of art in public spaces in any shape or form, it just gets the attention of the person. And the minute it does, because of its perhaps displacement, where it is not functional, like Anoma said, like that of buildings or you know, other specimens, it makes you think as to what it look at the time period that we're living, the vigorous development that humanity has gone throughout these years, without thinking and reflection, has sort of promulgated into this situation where we have the whole world is on its knees thinking of new ways of going about, because all the old ways have just not provided the solutions that we need. And it all boils down to reflection. And if you look at art and the premise of artists, they're ones who think beyond the frameworks. They think, they question, they challenge the way things go about. So when there are works of public art in and around the spaces that we live, the practice of reflection, I believe, becomes something far more intense than what it is without. So that, I believe, would be a very strong value that public art would promulgate to those around.
Yeah, I think just to jump in there, not that I'm really, you know, I'm not on the panel to give opinions per se, but just very quickly, for me, I mean, I love public art so much. I was raised in London. and it was everywhere. And I kind of wrote a piece on this recently. I never published it or anything. I just wrote it for myself. And for me, public art is about disruption. For me, it's about, in my daily life, when I'm walking in the urban environment, I have set patterns, set behavioral patterns, set codes of where I walk, what Starbucks I go to. It's this repetitive action, right? Which forms kind of my existential fabric. And then when there's the insertion of this public art, it disrupts these coded learning processes. And it creates this ambiguity. And the thing with the art is that, all right, there's physical limitations in terms of the materiality, et cetera, and so on. But in terms of the piece, it's not bound by the laws of physics or the universe, or do you see what I'm saying? Neither is my emotional reaction. So suddenly I get this new existential feeling, no matter what it is, good or bad, positive, negative, that isn't part of my normal coded daily life. And that for me is where I find that existential value and that nourishment that Inoma was talking about, just knowing that this kind of urban landscape, this kind of homogenized capitalist system in which I'm sort of doing my best to survive isn't the only layer of reality that's there. And suddenly I tap into something else, even if it's just for a brief second, and that for me is sort of why I love public art so much. But going back to you, Rushi. So, I mean, we talked again, I'm kind of touching on different elements.
I'd just like to add a small rider to that, to all the die-hard critics of art, not art critics, but critics of art and the place of public art. It can also transform economies. Look at Bilbao. It was just, it was unknown. It didn't exist. And now it's on very much on the tourist map. Look at Cloudgate. Okay, Chicago was still Chicago, but look at what Cloudgate has done. So it can translate into something very tangible too.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that. And then in terms of obviously, looking at things, moving into kind of the architectural sphere, public art obviously impacts the environment within which it is placed, right? So say, for example, if we're talking about, public art, let's say for the moment, we're narrowing it down to say the urban environment. How would you say that, public art sort of impacts the urban fabric?
James, that broke up the signal. Could you just repeat that?
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, obviously,
just the question that broke up.
Yeah. So how would you say that that public art impacts the urban environment?
Oh, I think it impacts it in every way. For one thing, it has a physical presence, right? So that can impact. And like we said, it engages with everybody around it, whether they engage with it actively or not, even passively. It being there causes an engagement.
Even if they feel anti it, I think it's
even that is an engagement. And it's a disruptor, like you said, it could be a disruptor, it could be an enhancement, it could be, but finally it sort of pushes you out of your status quo, and it pushes you out of the boxes you have placed yourself in. So it always, affects people around it. I also think that, if you really look at history, there has always been a connection between art and the state of a civilization. And at the most prolific, the most glorious points in history of any civilization, there was great art. Whether art inspired them to do it, or whether they were inspired to produce art at that point, which lasted and engaged us, or whether it was both. But that connection is undeniable. So I think, it generates all these, it engages a public space in all these ways, besides just being physically present. And another thing is, art is, it could also sometimes just be that a city creates a space which allows other forms of art, more transient forms of art, like performing arts, which is open to the city, which is just about in response to a particular place in the city or in response to something that's happening in the country at that time. So yeah, that's how it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, like you said, the physicality of the object or the sculpture or the piece is only just, the physicality. It's basically human beings that infuse it with meaning, but also it's where that object sits in relation to its environment, which then has new connotations, which stimulates kind of new activities and new sort of forms of behavior and new kind of experiences. So I guess that's sort of the kind of effects on the environment kind of radiate out from that kind of central focal point, but how that manifests can sort of, obviously changes from area to area and piece to piece. So that's what's really interesting, I find, when discussing, we're throwing around very broad terms here, like public art and, urban environment. In fact, there's such a sort of a nexus of relations happening here, there's so many different kind of outcomes. And yes, we have to talk in sort of generalizations. And I think that's part of the problem, not the problem, but in terms of sort of comprehension of art, say on a socioeconomic scale or a societal scale, that a lot of people see it as kind of this mystery or this sort of intangible sort of thing. And that could maybe be to the detriment of the impact it can make or is allowed to make, because, so say, for example, Azara, going over to you very quickly, what would you, again, could be just speculation, but sort of touching on that point, what would you say is the kind of governmental thoughts on public art? I mean, I don't know if you've had any exposure at the governmental level or meetings with Minister of Arts or whatever the case may be. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that or any insights.
There have been government commissions, in fact, with artists, and there was one at Dear Tuena by Jagat Veer Singh, and because of certain controversies, it even had to be taken down, and now it is being used for a different space. But I think it also, the government getting involved has its pros and cons, because when the state does fund and encourage cultural tangibles in and around the cities, it sort of creates space and a more stable way through which art can constantly be promoted. Now, even if you look at the works like Yayoi Kusama's work in Japan, her polka dots, the infinity concept, she's able to very consistently talk about it because she has all sorts of support from, the commercial industries to the state to a larger audience. But having said that, the state also not always being a part of it can be a good thing, because art is also expression in its entirety that could be derived from any particular the state, it may not, and that also becomes an interesting engagement point. So I think that it definitely should have, it would be great if the state also partakes in it, but it would be great to also have a lot of private permissions of public art in private spaces to even the corporates, because it engages different types of conversations, and that I believe is one of the core reasons that public art is successful and has a place in every era.
Yeah, 100%.
I'd also like to add something there, Trace. I think, I'm sorry, I'm just cutting in, but I think
No, go for it. This
important
is what this is about. Yeah, go
that,
for it.
Our government is very challenged because we have so many needs. And sometimes it really is hard to argue in favor of art over something like, health needs. But I think especially for us, we should try and engage the private sector.
Exactly.
Because
think
at the end of the day, it's a kind of a CSA, because it is benefiting society at large. And I think also in terms of, when you commission a public art, the process of commissioning is almost as important as, it's very important. That's what leads to the final output. It's not just the artist, it's the process of commissioning it. So it's harder to get that right in the public sector than it is in the private sector. So I think that we need to create that awareness and push for it from the private sector.
Absolutely. And if you look at, say, Bloomberg Bank in London, it's an amazing repository of art. Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London has, I think, 1,800 artworks. It's a public hospital, actually, but it is also a repository of great art. And it's very valuable collections. Okay, Deutsche Bank and Bloomberg have huge collections which are on public display in their buildings, but they can be on every level, and even a hospital, or even there are some amazing hotels like the Silo in Cape Town, which has just been designed by, I think, Heatherwick Studios. Again, has an amazing art positioning collection, museum of art connected to it. In fact, the museum of the greatest collection of African art, I think, apparently. And so there's a lot that can happen, with our hoteliers. I mean, I think Jetwing had done something with Fairway, who did some with art. I mean, there has been some, but there could be so much more. I think John Keels has a very strong position on art as well, John Keels Holdings. But we could do so much more in our public spaces, in our public buildings, inside, on the forecourt, as well as looking to the government, as you say, which is handling so much to kind of make an impact.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And on the John Keels thing, I know in terms of the Cinnamon Life project, they're going to use that as a chance to have a very strong kind of art initiative happening there. There's going to be big sculptures, and
they hold quite a huge collection, I think.
Exactly. And I think Sorry, go on.
So something like Jetwing has, again, in their public spaces, sort of a whole important collection of art. So it's possible for the corporates to actually work harder or to work more effectively in holding collections, which of course are going to be, as Ruchi says, they have value as well. They will definitely, there has an investment value, and as Deutsche Bank says, they don't buy art necessarily for investment, but it's not an investment either. So it's actually not. It's not throwing it away, but there's a little bit the sense that it's just a sort of decorative extra, which is not really of value, but the value is that it's actually whether we can change the mindset of how we value art. What do you think, everybody? I mean, that's something I really...
I mean, exactly. That's kind of what I was sort of half alluding to before in my kind of convoluted tangent explanation, was basically saying that because there's no tangible, I can't remember who touched on it, there's no tangible ROI, measurable metrics in terms of, you can't quantify. Someone was talking about, quantification and classification. We can't say, well, 1,000 people will come to the piece and experience a, joy increase level of 75%, which will do this, which will do that. I mean, one could argue that, yes, you can say there's a stimulation of kind of, microeconomies and around public art pieces over time, and more people come there, which in turn leads to more, buying from the local vendors, etc., and so on. So I think there's a maybe a financial metric possibly that's still a bit sort of abstract, but again, it's that if there were those tangible metrics, I think it would be a lot easier of a sell, especially at the kind of state level, for sure. But yeah, I think it is a question.
Sorry.
Yes.
I think one aspect of creating that awareness of value is actually creating platforms for interaction. We haven't had much of that, and this is one such. This whole festival is, sort of trying to create that, where we actually bring artists, designers, and corporates together, you know, who are not, because we all tend to live in our little bubbles. And I think this disengagement of bubbles is what, you know, causes a sort of a devaluation or fails to create that value.
Yeah, yeah. I think working in, as you said, you know, bubbles or silos.
But public art is not supposed to be valued in a financial sense because it is the property of the public. Having said that, corporate collections that are built and bought of artists, that has an investment value. But I think mixing the two genres or concepts, I think would dilute that conversation.
But how do you actually get it commissioned, Azara? Now, I agree with you in where you have collections that can only be viewed privately, like if it's an art collection. But you know, the private sector can commission, and it happens. Art which is very public within their domain, so like sometimes it's at the entrance of a building or it's in the square, you know, which affects their domain, but it also creates an opportunity for the public to relate to it, you know. So there are opportunities there, and I think it's just a breakthrough. Right now we have to find that breakthrough because we don't have the culture or the tradition in modern times of you know, engaging with public art or commissioning public art.
Yeah, I think it's almost a case of that you need that first.
No, I do understand, but like if you look at Jeffrey Baba's spaces, you have Lucky Senanayake, Ina De Silva, as artists promoting, but there is a mechanism through which that is worked internally. But I do believe that, like you said, Ruchi, there has to be different processes where the corporates could also engage with artists separately so that it doesn't always have to come through a single process. So that most definitely should happen. And the engagement, sorry.
For instance, the British Council in New Delhi, when they commissioned their new building, it was designed by Charles Correa. And I actually forget the artist. He wasn't very well known at that time. They commissioned an artist to do a mural in stone on the building, and that is viewed from the street. So it becomes very much part of the streetscape, you know, and it's a very permanent. So it's, I mean, there are ways in which
of course,
the private commissioning can become, sort of generate a public engagement.
No, an interesting hybrid, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, I think when one sort of drills down beneath all of this, it's a question of, you know, accessibility and exposure. So whether it's private commission, state, you need that. Again, the traditional perception by some people maybe would be that, you know, art is kind of behind walls and galleries, and there's those layers of separation to a degree, you know, held by some people. So again, for me, public art is all about that sort of democracy and accessibility to things. So as you said, there's that hybrid possibility. If it's a private commission, it's on display in such a way where people can still enjoy it where they walk by. And I think kind of what I'm gathering from what you guys are saying, it's almost a case of, if we could get that first piece that is a real success,
exactly,
and get that engagement and people see the tangible benefits, and then it's a hit, to put it in a very, you know, blunt terms, then I think it's a knock-on effect. You get that sort of incremental change, momentum, another one pops up, you know, so it's just that thing of persevering and seeing where it goes. So very quickly, we need to wrap up. I wish we could, you know, I'm just starting to warm up now. I feel like we're starting to sort of get somewhere. So unfortunately, we do have to sort of wrap up. So very quickly, I just want to go around and sort of, you know, very quickly, few sentences, starting with you, Anoma. What are your thoughts on the future of public art in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think the future is that we have to get the people who have the power to make it happen, understand that it's absolutely vital to society and to the city, and that it will actually also, as Ruchi says, generate income. I mean, if you look at Venice, gets 30 million visitors a year, which they don't need, they don't want that many, but it's because the whole city, what can give you but art? The whole city I mean, the buildings are art, everything in it is a visual delight. And so there is a lot to financially as well to be gained from really, engaging with this and taking this on and actually commissioning it. And I just think government and the mayors and corporate institutions, and whether they're hospitals or hotels, should all get together and really understand the huge value of art in terms of healing, as well as in terms of even income generation. So yeah, one can't have too much art in a city, can one? I wanted to ask you all of that.
No, I don't think so. I think the more the better, more the merrier for me.
Yeah.
What about you, Ruchi? What would you say the future of public art in Sri Lanka is?
I think the future of public art in Sri Lanka has to be created. That's what we're all engaged in trying to sort of catalyze. I think I'm like, personally, I have great hope pinned on Port City. After having commissioned the art competition, I have great hopes pinned on them getting it executed right. And I think once we have a few examples, people, other agencies, corporates, sometimes we never know, the government might also follow suit and engage, and commission more public art. But even if we have a couple of them, they'll start that process of conversations and engagement of the public with it. So, I think we need that catalyst. That's what I'm rooting for.
I think public art definitely has a very strong future, and positioning Sri Lanka from a cultural tourism point of view. Because Sri Lanka, if you look at it as an island, what I find very unique is that we embrace the cultures of all who visited the country, like that of the Portuguese, the colonizers, and even our port has been very instrumental in bringing people of different nationalities, our culture. Like even if you look at batik as a cultural tangible, it has the influences of, although it wasn't originated in Sri Lanka, it was originated in Thailand, but we have our own flavor. So what I believe is that we have these sporadic spots and in Sri Lanka, which are not traditionally public art monuments, but are very culturally strong, like that of tropical modernist houses to even some of the public art that we have around, to interesting ways through which we communicate our culture, even in fabric. So if public art in an essence can sort of incorporate all of this and also take on ways through which these different fragments are brought together, and this perspective is shown holistically, art, both Anoma and Ruchi said, will not just be an income generator, but also a brand identity creator for this country in terms of its cultural wealth. And that, I believe, and that perspective could come forth very strongly through the conversations on public art and more art around.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that it ultimately, from what I'm hearing from you guys, I think we're sort of not quite at a cusp, but we're in the melting pot of possibility. There's potential there, but in terms of the kind of tangible outcomes, we just don't know yet, you know, if certain things go a certain way. But I think I definitely agree, you need that catalyst, you need that spark to start this kind of chain reaction. And I think that that potential is simmering, bubbling. How it's going to articulate and manifest, who knows? But that's the joy of the artistic process, and tied in with kind of, you know, society itself. But yeah, so we have to wrap up there. I think we definitely sort of at least touched on the different ways public art can impact, from, you know, the personal individual to sort of national identity, to the economical, to the environmental, and doing all that in about 50 minutes is good work. So I'd like to thank everybody on the panel. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege. And, you know, everyone stay safe out there. Enjoy the rest of SLDF 2021. And we'll see you on the flip side. So take care and thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.